Good morning, folks. Oh, now you're really taking the talk amongst yourselves thing to heart, aren't you? How is everybody feeling this morning? Yeah? Good conference so far? Yes, it's fine. It's okay. So I think it's going great. I'm biased, obviously, but I'm talking to people from all across this country and beyond who are here for this. It sounds like people are learning a lot and even more importantly connecting with each other on the deep level of purpose about this work that brings us here. So anyway, I'm Don Iveson. I'm the co-chair of the board for the Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness, and I'm a recovering elected official. So I may have a few thoughts as we move into today's program. Which is around lobbying and government relations, which is crucial to this work, of course. And so I welcome you to Jabuktuk or Halifax, which is unceded Mi'kma'ki territory and the ancestral and traditional lands of the Mi'kmaq people. And we honor and respect and are very, very grateful. And I had the chance to do the sunrise pipe ceremony this morning with one of the local elders and knowledge keepers, and it was very special for me because I know the Blackfoot and the Dene and the Cree and the Nakota Sioux um, traditions a little bit from my time out in Treaty Six territory, but it's always wonderful to be introduced to um, the slightly different and nuanced and very special traditions of this place. So I'm grateful to have had the chance to do that this morning and reflect on the value of traditional knowledge and ways of knowing to inform this work for all people who are looking to heal as part of their housing experience, rehousing journey. And so we're not going to cover that theme so much in the first part of this conversation, but I do think that part of a premise for me of government relations in this space is thinking about the circle or four-sided table of yes federal, yes provincial, yes municipal, but also indigenous governments who are crucial to a whole of society approach to ending something as complex but necessary to solve as homelessness. So I hope we can thread in some questions and some discussion about Indigenous engagement and partnership in the government relations context as part of this. Um, but I've said enough. I'm very pleased to be joined by two of our speakers this morning. We had a third who wasn't able to join us in the final analysis, but this will give us a chance to go a little bit deeper on these two presentations. And of course, there'll be lots of time for Q&A and discussion. And I'm sure there's wisdom and experience in the room that, again, we're here to share that all together. So I look forward to the Q&A portion. We have with us here, all the way from Vancouver, from Covenant House, Chelsea Minnis, and she's going to introduce herself properly in a moment here. But I asked them each for a fun fact, and her fun fact wasn't very fun, which is that she is recovering from not getting Taylor Swift tickets for her. So if any of you can help her with that, she'd be she'd be most grateful. And Adi Rao is with CUPE in Ottawa and lived in Edmonton for a while. And his fun fact was that he flyered the neighborhood I actually live in right now. That's my fun fact. He flyered my neighborhood when I was running for mayor. So thank you, volunteers. Volunteers are the lifeblood of a great campaign. So thank you for that, Adi. And so you'll hear his introduction as part of his presentation in due course. And just a reminder, there will be a recording available of this after. So if there's something you missed, something you want to go back to, the presentations will also be posted as well. And again, ultimately, we want this to be interactive and discussion and learning for all of us. Because even me, I still have a lot to learn in this realm. So humbly, invite that dialogue. So without further ado, Chelsea Minnis, everybody.
So I have an almost 12-year-old daughter. So put some context to the Taylor Swift situation. And I'm on Pacific time, so the devastation was real very late at night here. So um, Maybe I can use some of the public policy skills to influence how Ticketmaster works. Only.
If ever something needed regulation, it's Ticketmaster. Right.
And keep it real. My name is Chelsea, and I am currently the Chief Program Officer at Covenant House in Vancouver. I've been there over 16 years now. I started working as a frontline youth worker, was a social worker, various jobs there. Covenant House is home to me. And I come to this presentation very much in the learning stage. So I am a social worker. Public policy is not my gift. Government relations is not my gift. But what I have learned over my years is that if I want to impact real change, then I'm going to have to get involved in this sometimes scary government realm because poor public policy, to my mind, is what has got us here and is going to help us get out of it. So, this is just a little bit of a crash course on why public policy is important to folks like me and what it is and how it doesn't have to be so scary as I've learned over the last number of months. I would like to recognize a colleague, Justin Goodrich, who worked with us on this work and was instrumental in helping me be less fearful of this work. And also, a couple of months ago, a dear colleague of mine that some of you might know, Leslie from Covenant House Toronto, they said something that really kind of sparked that fire. And what they said to me was, homelessness is a choice that governments make. And I'm sure that I've heard this before, but I guess I was just in a moment when my soul was kind of ready to hear that again and realized, yeah, it's a choice they're making, and we vote in the government so we can help influence them to feel like making a different choice. So that's kind of how I come to this work. Not at all an expert. There's probably people in this room and at this table who will be much better suited to answer your questions. But this is my crash course, Public Policy 101. And I was taught to do this timer, but now I talked and didn't have the timer. So here we go. So, what is public policy? Public policy generally denotes both the general purpose of government action and the views on the best or preferred means of carrying that out. So essentially, public policy is a tool to tackle issues of concern, such as homelessness. At its simplest, it's a choice made by government to undertake some course of action or inaction. Hence, why the statement, homelessness is a choice governments make, resonated with me so much. So, what is the difference between public policy and law? And this was one of those important learnings that I had to understand on my journey to trying to understand this craziness that is interaction with government. Is there any government folks in here? I like I love you now. And we're going to talk a little bit about why relationship is key, but oh, it was really tough for me to learn your side. Um, Public policy is really about the outline of what a government is going to do and how it can achieve those goals for society as a whole. Whereas the laws, so public policy is not a law. You need the policy and then you need laws to help enact it, essentially, is the Coles Notes version of that. This is a diagram that really helped my social work brain understand this. So, policy is kind of the seeds we plant, the ideas we have around improving our surroundings. And then there's the trunk, and that's kind of like the law or the act. And so that's the legislation that creates the rules that govern and enforce all of these like policies that we have as our roots. And then there's regulation, which is kind of like the branches. And those are all the ways in which we deal with the laws or the trunk. This might be wrong. Government people can correct me, but this is how I understood it. And why does this matter? Why should social workers and frontline people care about this? Because public policy is everywhere. It impacts every single one of us in both positive and not so positive ways sometimes. It's utilized as a response to issues or problems identified by the citizenry, which is a very technical term that means all of us. And it addresses a wide range of issues, everything from homelessness to things like regulations around trans fats. And those who are marginalized are likely to be further marginalized or marginalized as at all as a result of both circumstance and poor public policy. When I was learning about this, I came across this video. And it's a TEDx talk that we don't have time to watch today, but I'm happy to send you the link, or the name of it will be in the slides, or you can take a picture. But it's kind of a crash visual course in the influence of public policy. Another way to look at it, some of us learn by seeing, some of us learn by doing. So I like to include different visual ways of learning about this too. And this is a great video I'd recommend if you are on the public policy journey like I am. It wanted to play. So a little bit more public policy theory. What are the key elements of public policy? I had these notes, but I'm not following along at all. I'm a social worker, not very tech savvy either, if you haven't noticed. So the key elements of public policy, a clear course of action that is adopted by our public authorities, and it provides both guidance and accountability. It's public policy because it impacts all of us. It requires the use of public resources, and it involves one of the levels of public policy governing body. So this could be councils, legislatures, parliaments, but it involves that. Yes, ministries. Public interests are defined only in relation to the goals or the values that actors hold. So this is kind of the part where we all collectively matter, because if we start to voice louder and louder and in new ways and in a good way, which we'll talk about a little bit later, we will influence what is defined as the goals and values. So all of this to say, we can make a difference. This I know to be true. Some reasons why this is important to our work and why it will benefit your organizations and your communities is that engaging in public policy, whether it's advocating for new public policy or revisions, it's a really good way for organizations to build your social and political capital. It's a really great way to make connections. It's a really great way to build relationships. And that's what we're in the business of. We're in the business of relationship. We're not in the business of doing it alone. And we need to bring all the stakeholders to the table, which includes the government. As advocates and thought leaders engaging in public policy, it's an opportunity for your voice to be heard. It's a way for you to use your voice to advocate, to be a part of the solution. It's also a way to transition you from just being an influencer or pressuring to really being a part of the decision making. How do you do it? There's a few ways I've broken it down. There's kind of three methodologies, and there's no right or wrong. They just are. So one way that you can be engaged in this is an ally. And what that means is one that's associated with another as a helper, a person or a group that provides assistance and support in an ongoing activity or effort. There's advocacy, where you're pleading the case, you are defending a cause or a proposal, you're lobbying, you're involved in advocating for legislation. This definition more implies that advocacy is mostly about formal or legal activity. And then there's an activist who advocates or practices activism. This is where you see public protests, demonstrations, that sort of thing. There's no right or wrong. Sometimes it's a combination, but it's just interesting to know what is motivating or behind what you're choosing to do. And there's different times when different ones might be useful. At Covenant House, we believe in advocacy as our method in terms of public policy. Of course, we are engaged in allyship, but we have made a conscious decision to take it up a notch and include advocacy in our work. And so, what that sometimes looks like is that we might be considered less vocal publicly. You might not see us at public demonstrations or more of those out there kind of opportunities, although sometimes you do, but you have to be strategic. um, Breaking the windows generally doesn't get the attention that's helpful for us. So we tend to take the advocacy approach. And despite being less vocal publicly, we're very much engaged in public policy. And the creation of advocacy and public policy with our partners. And here is some examples of how we do that. There's a lot of ways you can be engaged in public policy. Some concrete examples that we've done recently are we partnered with our friends at the Canadian Association to End Human Trafficking, and we created a statement and letter regarding the immigration policies that have recently been released. And so we took a position and an advocacy and asked for certain things to be included in that new public policy. There are opportunities for you to engage at all levels of government in terms of studies that are happening. So some things that Covenant House has done, they call it expert witness. Their title, not mine. In no way am I an expert witness of anything. But you can be asked to speak at things. We've done one on anti-trafficking. We have done witness testimony on the overdose crisis in the province of British Columbia. We have done federal testimony around the mental health of women and girls. So there's lots of ways you can be engaged. It can be letter writing, it can be meetings, all of that sort of thing. We are running out of time. Advocacy includes all of these sorts of things: collaboration, awareness, thought leadership. It's really fun. There's lots of ways to get engaged, but it's also work. So it's important when you're starting this that you really get your agency and your colleagues on board, because it needs to be a strategic investment of time and sometimes resources as well. And so you've got to be ready for it, but also understand that there's a place for all of you in this work. Depending on your interests, you have to start somewhere. This is just an example of the policy cycle. So we need to identify the problem, which I think all of us are pretty good at. I think you can all think of a problem you might want to solve through policy. And then you got to do your policy analysis, strategy development. This is what I mean when I say it's work. So you find your problem that you want to be a part of the solution for, and you create a plan. So and this is just what has worked for my social work brain. You identify the need. Where is the opportunity for improvement? Where are there opportunities to better align values, create solutions? And then think about, what does solving that problem look like? So that's kind of the pie in the sky moment. If I was able to impact this change, what would it look like? This is an opportunity to dream big. Then you do the analysis. What are the realities? And it's kind of, you could do like a SWOT analysis. What are the societal, political, financial, all the factors, the environmental scan around what is the reality of the situation and the policy environment? Does something exist? Does it not? Who are the key actors? Who are you going to make friends with? Who in the government is going to become your bestie, your ally? What partners in the community are you going to join with? I met a new friend from home, UGM. What are we going to do together? Find your friends. And what kind of activities are you going to undertake at each step of this policy cycle? Who are the decision makers? What factors might influence their decision? Internal, external, who are all the players? Really understand your environment, understand who you are talking to. And then, if you're successful, how are you going to roll out this policy? How are you going to measure it? What would be the metrics of success? Governments, agencies, they love numbers. Which doesn't tell the whole story, as all of us on the front line know, but it's important. And that's part of knowing who you're talking to, knowing who you're trying to engage with. So, how are we going to have metrics that they will understand? And how are you going to measure them? All about engagement. Just as relationship is key to my work with young people, relationship is key to our work in public policy. Engagement, education, the same things that we try to do with the folks that we walk alongside and our communities. That's what we're trying to do when we're doing public policy work, too. It's about engaging, it's about having conversations, it's about educating, because when people know better, they want to do better. So, coming from a sense of curiosity and wanting to help inform rather than a sense of you are wrong and I'm going to tell you why, and this is the policy, we need to fix it. Although, goodness knows that's what I would want to do, and I feel like it'd be a million times easier. We really have to come to it with a sense of curiosity and relationship. And then prepare yourself for it not to work. Even the most well thought out plans often need pivots and modifications, and all of that is good. And even if you've done the analysis and you think you've thought all this through, be ready to embrace the things that come at you, because they will, and questions will come at you that you didn't think of, especially when, from my experience, I'm coming from social services, I'm a social worker, and I'm working with really smart people, sometimes in the government with crazy degrees and all this sort of thing. And so I'm not going to think of everything they're going to think of. So just be prepared that you're going to feel really great, and then you might have to pivot. And that's okay. It's part of the journey. If you want to be successful, this is my equation. Your method, your engagement, which to me is the most important, how you're going to evaluate it, how you're going to monitor it. That will create strong public policy. This is just a little bit of a review, and I know that we are short on time. So this is just some action items that you'll be able to have in my slides, or I can send to you if they're not on the app. Things that you can check off as you're engaging in this work. Some helpful tools, tips, and tricks that have worked for me. I wanted to give you some examples of how this has been successful in our communities. So I wanted to use an example that I'm hopeful is something we have all seen so we can understand together. So one of the case studies is the Heart and Stroke Foundation. This organization has this down to a T. They're very successful in engaging in public policy work that influences change in communities. And I think that folks like me can learn a lot from them. So by influencing public policy through advocacy, the Heart and Stroke Foundation has been successful at many things, such as trans fat rules in our food supply, making public spaces smoke free, all these sorts of things. Another one was having AEDs placed in all recreation facilities across Canada. This can be done well, and it works. There's so many examples of organizations that have done this well, especially in healthcare. And so If they can do it, so can we. A few final thoughts. Most social service providers, including me, have historically been focused on service delivery, that frontline work, which is so near and dear to our hearts, and only engage in a reactionary type of way with public policy and government. But I think if we want to impact real social change and have systemic change, we're going to have to be more in the realm of prevention and proactive work in terms of public policy. To truly address the social inequities, our social service sector is going to have to do this, whether we like it or not. And that's what I found. And I really didn't want to like this. But as I've learned more about it, I understand that my big lofty goals and ideas about how wonderful our communities can be, I'm going to have to engage in this work to see that happen in my lifetime. Public policy work is not the same as activism during political cycles and election years. Sure, you might gain more traction and people might be more willing to listen because they need a good story, but this has to be an ongoing effort that isn't attached to election cycles. I'm waiting for someone to tell me, get off the stage. And I'm learning to believe that public policy is the only way to foster long-term systemic change, which I think is what all of us really want and why all of us are here in Halifax this week. That's my crash course on what has worked for us. Thank you.
I've only one thing to say in response, which is I think we need more social worker brains involved in this work. Next up is Addie Rao.
Escape. Get rid of this one. You know which one it was? This one? Let's make it first. And this should work. And it does.
Hi, folks. Nice to see a full house. What feels like still quite early in the morning. My name is Addy. I'm with the Canadian Union of Public Employees, and I should probably start by saying, why is QB here? Because people often ask me, what's QB doing over here? Well, the answer is CUPE is obviously Canada's largest union, but we're a social union. We believe in the power of the labor movement to win positive outcomes for communities as a whole, to use our bargaining power to fight for better outcomes for all of our communities, not just for our members, not just for the workplaces in which our members work. That's the first reason. The second reason is we actually represent lots of folks who work in housing. We represent folks who work in street outreach programs, folks who work in housing policy, folks who work for housing corporations. So this is an issue that also cuts deep for us from that angle. And then the third reason is the housing crisis is affecting everybody. It's affecting our members just as much as it is affecting our members' neighbors. So that's why we were here. We're always really happy to be part of these conversations, and I just wanted to say thank you to the folks at CAH for allowing us to be here and have this conversation with you. A little bit about why I wanted to talk to you about this. Our main message to you is we want you to call your MP. We just want you to talk to your MPs. We want you to talk to your elected representatives. We want you to talk to your city councilors. We want you to talk to folks that represent you. And this is really just a 101 kind of demystifying how do you even go about doing that? So I guess before we even get started, I should say that my background is a little bit in politics. I worked for the NDP for some time federally, as well as for the provincial NDP in Alberta. Since then, I've been out of that work, but I do a fair amount of government relations work, and media relations work for in the nonprofit sector, and the Law Society of Ontario allows me to practice as a lawyer as well, which is very kind of them. Um, um, I also want to note that I'm really grateful to be here to be back on Mi'kmaq territory. I have had the privilege to live and work on Treaty 6 and Treaty 7 territory, also on the stolen lands of the Pescatomakati, the Wolastoqey, and the Mi'kmaq in New Brunswick for a couple years, and now I'm based on the lands of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people in what is called Ottawa. So thank you. Really excited to be having this conversation with you. Um, I'm going to jump into what we're going to talk about here. Before we do that, are there any GR people in the house? I see a hand up. Is that I can't see who it is. Oh, hi. Okay, awesome. Oh, there's more hands up. Okay, great. So at the end of the presentation, they will take questions. So thank you for being here. Really appreciate that. So why do we want to prioritize government relations is going to be the first sort of broad bit that we'll try and talk about. Engaging MPs and senators is kind of the focus of this presentation. With apologies to municipal colleagues, I I kind of messed that one up. And then of course other decision makers to kind of keep in mind as we move forward. So this presentation really is kind of focused on elected officials mostly, but I kind of want to tell you, just get a sense of like, why do we want to prioritize government relations? The simple answer is our leaders kind of need educating, and you are the experts. I mean, this is just a screenshot of Premier Blaine Higgs, who believe that there's no crisis to deal with on housing, and I think there's about 2,000 people here who would disagree. Uh, this is a screenshot of a time when former Conservative Party leader Aaron O'Toole said that he didn't believe, or he wouldn't say whether he believed systemic racism was real. Um, and then this, I think, just happened this week, or maybe last week, where I mean, I don't know. Actually, I haven't had a chance to go into Hansard to see exactly what was said, but this is just very funny. Daniel Blakey, the NDP MP, tweeted saying that Pierre Poilievre referred to co-ops as a Soviet-style gimmick. Now, I don't actually know to what extent literally this is true. But regardless, it sounds like some folks need some educating. So, but you are the expert. So our goal here is to just convince you all, please call your MP. All right. So why prioritize GR? You're the boss. You're the expert, right? You got to establish positive relationships. We just talked about the importance of relationships. And really the goal for you is to kind of become their consultant. You kind of want to be the person that your elected representative thinks of to call to ask questions about the issue that you care about. And when you've achieved that, you've kind of met your goal. You may not immediately see the public policy outcome you want to see, but being able to be the person that gets called is a win on its own. Now, many of you are probably saying, I can't do advocacy. My organization can't do advocacy. We're not allowed. See if I can use this. Oh, that works. Well, the first thing I want to note is that GR isn't just about lobbying. Okay, it's not government relations is not just about lobbying. It's just about building relationships. So, for example, inviting the member of parliament to an event that you organized, having them just hey, come by, meet the folks that we work with. That's engagement. Ask them to come to speak on a panel or discussion that you're organizing. That's engagement. Or to moderate a panel. That's kind of engagement. A really good practice, a really easy thing that I really like as an example. Who's anybody here from Ottawa? Any Ottawa folks? Eh, Awesome, sweet, yeah. So Ottawa, there's a great organization in Ottawa called the Center Down Citizens of Ottawa Corporation, which is an affordable housing provider, a nonprofit affordable housing provider. You know what they do? Every AGM is chaired by the local city councilor. How great is that? The local city councilor is the chair of every one of their AGMs, and it's just like a lovely way for them to maintain a relationship with the city councilor, for the city councilor to meet their constituents. It's a really, really excellent example of how to do GR. That's not like what we consider lobbying. This was mentioned earlier, diversity of tactics. I just before we even continue on this road, lobbying is not the only way to be engaged, right? So if you don't like politicians and you don't want to do this, that's okay. You don't have to do this. Uh, but hopefully some aspects of this workshop will still be useful. This is kind of a bit of some examples of kind of the diversity of tactics, right? Like this was mentioned earlier as well, kind of protests, demonstrations, organizing town halls, all kinds of stuff, petitions, letter writing campaigns. These are all different ways in which you can be engaging in advocacy. If you don't want to, relationships with decision makers is just one aspect. You kind of need like a group of people shouting outside, calling for something for you to be able to say to your decision maker, people want that thing, right? So there's every way to engage matters. I just wanted to share this photo with you all. This just really inspires me every time I scroll past it on my phone. This is a screenshot of Acorn members in New Brunswick uh, doing a a virtual protest against COVID evictions, and it was just the stories that were shared, the just the courage and the determination of these folks who came forward to this action. But I want to note that over here on the bottom right hand corner, do you see what's over there? MP Atwin's assistant. That matters, right? That matters. The member of parliament's assistant was there. They were there to see this. They were there to sort of engage with the folks doing this action. This really matters. This is the kind of stuff that also helps you build relationships. Okay, let's talk about how do you actually go about doing this. So there's also good reasons, by the way, not just with MPs, but to also build relationships with bureaucrats and so on. We can talk about that in Q&A. But here's just how do you go about getting a meeting with an MP? You, you got to email them, right? You got to email them. Uh, we would suggest email about a month in advance if this is not an urgent issue. Prepare, give them some heads up. If you're trying to do like a lobbying day, if your organization's like, you know what we want to do, we want to get as many of our members possible to go to Victoria to meet all of the MLAs, or we want to go to Winnipeg or to Halifax or to Ottawa. You want to send out a save the date, right? You want to send out a save the date to all the elected officials and be like, hey, we're going to be coming on this day. Please make free up your schedule. We're going to ask you for a meeting soon. That's a good way to do it. If you're asking for a virtual meeting, it's always it's easier. You can maybe work with a couple of weeks notice. But you should all know what the sitting calendar is. If you all know, does everybody know what the House sitting calendar is? So that's where you kind of go. You can see the schedule of when MPs are planning to go to Ottawa, and then the weeks in between are called constituency weeks, and they're likely going to be in their constituency. So you can kind of plan your lobbying idea or your GR idea based around when you think they're going to be where. You have to do a phone follow-up. These emails get missed. Who amongst us hasn't missed an email? These emails get missed. You have to do a phone follow-up. You send that email, a couple of days later, phone the office, be like, hey, I need to talk to you. Find a human being, talk to the human being, ask the human being, did you see my email? That's all. You don't need anything. You don't need anything else from them. You just need them to acknowledge that you need some human being to confirm that the email was received. That's it. That's the biggest. Those emails get missed so often. They're inundated with emails. So, and odds are what's going to happen is you're going to ask the person who answers the phone, did you get my email? They're going to be like, when did you send it? And they'll be like, what's the email address you sent it from? And then you can kind of hear them clickety clacking, searching your email. And then they'll be like, oh yeah, I see it. That's what you need. You need them to confirm they've seen your email. And then, that once you've done that, that's a huge victory. You'll probably get your meeting. Expect to be rescheduled. MPs are busy. They might reschedule. It's okay. Don't get mad. Expect half an hour. The most usually they'll give you half an hour, maybe a little bit more than that. Constituents are worth their weight in gold. Constituents matter. If you can find a constituent to go with you to an MP meeting, to an MLA meeting, that matters a lot. You will get bumped up the list. Maximum 2 to 3 people in a meeting. It gets a little unwieldy when you are more than 3 people. Makes for good photos if there's like 6 of you with the MP, but 2 to 3 people for a productive meeting. Oh, don't get annoyed, by the way, if you get a meeting with a staffer instead of the MP. That's okay. It's all part of building that relationship. Okay. Okay. So, what are you going to do when you get to the meeting? You got to have something called a leave behind. Anybody heard this term, leave behind? It's like a one pager. It's like, I don't know why we call it a leave. I mean, obviously you call it a leave behind because we leave it behind. Uh, but it's a one pager, right? The point of it is you're gonna try to make your issue as simple as possible. Use rule of three kind of thing, right? Like 3 issues max, 3 solutions max, 3 ideas max. You want to make it as easy as possible, as simple as possible, and no matter what, you want to make sure that little document you've left it behind with that office, no matter what. You might be like, you email it maybe if you can ahead of time. Email other stuff too, but don't expect them to read everything. But like email, you have to have a one pager that just succinctly says what you're trying to get across. Because what if they misplaced the notes they wrote? What if they didn't write notes when you met with them? Just make sure you have a leave behind. If nothing else, that thing stays. You have to know what to ask, and this really depends on who you're talking to. The ask that you might have of a minister is going to be very different from the ask that you might have from the opposition critic or a government backbencher. Uh, each of these folks can do something really useful for you. Obviously, the minister can just solve your problem, but if you have a backbencher, that's great too. You can ask the backbencher to do something like, hey, can you ask a question in the House? Can you next caucus meeting? Can you commit to raising this with the minister? Can you if this is an opposition MP, might be really excited to ask a question in the House. If this is a government backbencher, maybe they'll be open to doing a member statement. If they're your MP, you could be like, hey, we did this really cool thing. Do you want to tell the House about it? Because they're always looking for member statements. Folks know what member statements are? The thing where they kind of get up and say something nice about what's going on in their riding. They used to always say something nice about what was going on in the riding. Over time, that kind of became a little bit more kind of uh, mean to each other over time. But that's kind of the intent of member statements, right? You stand up and you say something nice about what's going on. You got to track down what they say they're going to do. Write it down, and then don't be afraid to follow up. Commitment tracker. What we usually use in our meeting, we have a little sheet, and it has a little section that actually literally says commitment tracker at the bottom with like lines. And then we kind of write down, okay, this is what they said they're going to do. And then we go back and we huddle and we're like, okay, who's going to follow up with them and when, to make sure they do what they said they're going to do. So you gotta follow up. They're expecting that. They're expecting to be held accountable. There's committee meetings. Why bother? We're actually not going to bother because I don't have time. But we'll talk about that in questions. Let's talk about senators. Uh, we're in a really weird time with the Senate. So folks who have done GR work prior to the Liberal government will remember a very different Senate than the Senate we have today. There's a lot that can happen at the Senate these days. There isn't even really a Liberal caucus anymore at the Senate. There's like, the progressive senators, the independents. Um, People are all over the place on the Senate. There are some folks who want to work with other folks. There are some folks who want to work on their own. The accountability mechanism is different. There isn't the same kind of like, hey, you got to meet with me because like I'm going to vote for you. Well, there's nobody's voting for a senator, so the accountability is kind of different too. But senators tend to also want to hang out with their constituents. They aren't all totally insulated from daily life. Although everybody remembers lots of expense scandals, I'm sure. But every senator is different. You gotta think about the Senate nowadays when we talk about government relations. The way to get a meeting with a senator is pretty much the same, email, follow up, all that stuff. Uh, but you got to know your senator's deal, the person you're meeting with, you got to know what their deal is, because like it's not as straightforward as it used to be. It's not as straightforward as like, okay, this senator was appointed by this prime minister, therefore they're going to be this way. No, it's just not that way anymore. There are some senators who are like were appointed by this government who love nothing more than to just hit this government with everything they've got, right? Like it's a very different world in the Senate these days. In fact, it's so different that there's stories about how senators are being lobbied now more than ever before, just because of this totally different ecosystem. And I'll just tell you quickly the story of Bill C-22. Many of you are probably following C-22. This is the disability benefits bill. The bill was passed in the House, went to the Senate, and the community, the disability justice community, wanted some real changes, which the House didn't give them. So what did they do? They targeted the Senate. Well, the Senate got them. The bill originally was like, we will put in place regulation. The cabinet will put in place regulations someday. Well, and so the disability justice community was like, no, that's not good enough. And they got the Senate to change it to 1 year. There's a 1 year clock on the bill now to get regulations in place. There's no way, the original bill was like, there's no way to appeal if you get denied disability benefits. You get denied, you're kind of like, well, who do I go to be like, I got denied? Well, the Senate put in the amendment to make sure that there is now an appeal pathway in the bill. There was a whole conversation during the House committee stage around people living with disabilities have additional costs on their lives that the cost of living measure that we all talk about is just not the same. We can't be thinking about it the same way when we're talking about trying to ensure that folks living with disabilities have the supports they need. And so they wanted to see the disability justice community wanted to see a specific mention of that in the things that needed to be taken into account in coming up with those regulations, right? They wanted to see the special the cost of the additional cost of living with a disability taken into account, and they wanted it to be intersectional. Well, that didn't make it into the bill when it went to the Senate, but who put it into the bill? The Senate did, right? All of these things happened at the Senate, went back to the House, and now the bill has that stuff because the Senate like is doing stuff. So don't forget about your senator. Is the moral of that story. Do's and don'ts. Okay, you got the meeting. What are you gonna do? Well, make sure you know who's saying what, right? You easy stuff. You go in, don't show up and be like, okay, wait, do you want to take this part? I'll take no. Set all that stuff ahead of time. Make sure you know who's saying what. Obviously, introduce yourselves. Say something nice about the MP's work if you can. Look them up on Open Parliament. Do a keyword search for an issue you care about. Be like, hey, I really like that intervention you did that one time that I totally knew about before today. Say something nice if you can. Short summary, bring a personal story if you can about stories really matter, like, and especially if it's a story from the constituency, it really matters. Bring solutions. Nothing's more frustrating in a meeting where you go, here's all the problems, and then the MP goes, okay, what do you want me to do about it? And you're like, well, I don't really know. And it's tempting to be like, well, it's not my job, it's your job. But it's really you are the expert. The MP is going to be like, I really don't know what to do. Like, what do you want me to do about it? So come with solutions. Make time to listen to the MP. So don't try to like if they're speaking, just let them speak. Like write down what they're saying. You might get some nuggets. They might give you intel. Like I'm totally with you 100%. But you actually got to be talking to this other MP. You might get some good information. Take photos. Promote, tag them. Don't forget the MP's name in the meeting. Don't forget their party. Don't forget their constituency. Try not to react negatively if you end up meeting with a staff person instead of the MP. This might seem like a no-brainer, but like I've been in a meeting where this happened. Don't disagree with the people in your delegation in the meeting. Like it's not fun. It's very confusing, kind of embarrassing. Try not to make that happen. Always try to be on the same page. Uh, Stick to some talking points. Have a little message box. Everybody's these are the main things we're gonna hit. Try not to stray from it. Try not to interrupt the MP. Don't panic if you're suddenly having a conversation that's like not what you intended to have. Like maybe you start talking about like your kid's birthday and that leads somewhere else, and now all of a sudden 30 minutes are gone. And you're like, oh crap, I only got to 1 point out of the three. That's okay. That's what that leave behind is for. No matter what, you're leaving that leave behind, right? So that's what that's for. It's okay. Having a fun conversation in the end is still part of building that relationship. Try not to like say mean things about the MP's political party. uh, Sometimes it's hard. And try not to be rude about other MPs and their political parties, even if like the MP you're meeting with is trying to kind of bait you into it. Like that happens all the time. Like they'll because they're so used to being mean to each other, like they're so used to it, and they'll like say something mean about somebody else, and then try if you can to like not kind of fall into that trap because that can kind of go in ways you don't in directions you probably don't want it to go in. So just very quickly, other decision makers, don't forget about your counselors, don't forget about the bureaucracy, don't forget about other levels of government. Don't forget about when you're talking about, like trying to get a legislation changed. If you're asking an MP, for example, you can actually be like, hey, we're looking for this specific amendment. But if you're talking to bureaucratic and they can't amend the legislation, but what they can do is call a stakeholder conversation. Like think about what you can ask a bureaucrat versus what you can ask an MP. Not legal advice, but definitely like pay attention to lobbying rules. Generally speaking, this only applies to you if you're getting paid to do this work. So if you're doing it as on a volunteer basis, if you're sending volunteers, doesn't usually apply. But just be aware that there are usually rules in your jurisdiction around what is and is not lobbying. And finally, remember, you are the expert in these rooms. You are the expert. All of these conversations, you know what's going on. You know what's best. You have the answers. So don't be afraid to share them. Don't be afraid to talk to your MP about them. They want to hear from you about it. And I actually don't mean this facetiously. I mean this literally. Like some of you from Halifax will remember Gerald Keddy, former Conservative MP Gerald Keddy's remarks about unemployed Haligonians being no good bastards. Some of you will remember James Moore's former federal minister, his remarks about the federal government having no role in feeding children. Some of you may remember recent remarks from the Quebec housing minister, who was a real estate investor, saying, well, tenants should just invest in real estate. Um, and then, I mean, from our amazing, Rob Anders from Alberta, who was famous for sleeping a lot. Uh, and for many other things, but in this case, slept through a presentation about veterans homelessness. So there's just so there you are the expert, clearly. So please call your MPs, please call your representatives, please build those relationships because you are the folks who are going to make us get that public policy that Chelsea talked about that we all want to end this crisis and realize the right to housing. Some campaigns to look at if you want, but that's it. Thanks very much.
Well, that was great. Thanks, Eddie, for keeping it light. My fun fact is that I am now a registered federal lobbyist. Happened by accident. Long story. I'll spare you. But I just have one question for the group. While you think about your questions for our esteemed panelists here, is how many of you have actually met with one of your elected officials? Okay, that's really good. That's really good. How many of you enjoyed that meeting? Okay. Um, did you did did you did any of you come away surprised at the person that you met, that they were different than you expected them to be? That you had a precondition or a prejudgment of what they would be like, and it was different, positively or negatively? Yeah, some. Yeah, yeah. So my reflection on that is that all elected officials are people, and I've had this experience. Partly it's the power dynamics for sure. Sometimes it's the tribalism and the partisan environment. But it's very easy to forget that the person you're meeting with is also a human being, right? Because they have this role, they have this title. And there's a lot of assumptions about what comes with being in that role. But in my experience with meeting from people across the political spectrum at all levels, including Indigenous community leaders, is that every single one of those people who stepped up made an enormous sacrifice. Their family made an enormous sacrifice to do that. And there's some reason why they thought that was a good idea. Now, it might be a toxic, narcissistic reason why. Lord knows there's a lot of that right now. But in most cases, it didn't start there at the very least. And if you can find out what that is by asking questions and understand what their purpose is, what drives them, connecting to that and your issue, if you can connect it to that, will open up a continuing conversation. So just, it's the same principles that apply in frontline work, like approaching someone with common humanity and with humility and curiosity goes a long way. Coming in with a strong position and a set of judgments and assumptions about someone, how well does that work in this work? How well does that work in government relations? Same basic phenomenon, same human beings. That's my free advice on that. So having been lobbied and having now to lobby for a living. So, questions from the group? Anybody?
Hi, my name is Iona Stoddard. I am a city councilor in Halifax, and I have tried to meet with my MP, but keeps getting delayed. But what you said, Addie, about not getting locked in a conversation that maybe the MP is baiting you, and my MP and my MLA are both on the other side of the political party that's in the House now. So I'm just wondering, if they say something against the other party, or like you said, baiting, how do you politely get out of that? Because you don't want to offend them, or you don't want them to know. It's like a two-way street. You don't want to offend, but you don't want to support like rah rah rah, because you don't want to. Anyway, I'm saying too much, but you know what I mean. You know what I mean. Thank you.
Is that mic hot?
I think so.
Good.
Yeah. Thank you for the question, Ina. You're in a particularly unique situation as a counselor too. You've got to walk a really tight line, and I'm sure Don would have some really interesting things to say in response to your question as well. I mean, often I remember walking to a meeting with an MP who will remain nameless for the moment, but I can tell you afterwards who had a Make America Great Again hat like in the as soon as I walked in, and like the moment I walked in, I was like, this is not gonna go well. This is not gonna go. And honestly, like it was a struggle, but it was really just kind of like remembering kind of those bridging techniques of like staying on message where you're just kind of going, like I hear you, here's what I'm here to talk about, or just kind of like remembering that like totally totally valid to be annoyed and irritated and frustrated, but you're there with like the responsibility to do the one thing that you're trying to do and just remember trying to do it. But yeah, it's there's no magic answer to it, and especially in your situation, and I would defer to Dawn for sure on that.
But council is non-partisan.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's actually psychologically and socially difficult because what you're being invited to do is come into an in-group out-group dynamic. And so I think the best grounding is to remember which issue or which cause or which group you're there to advocate on behalf of. And then the other thing, especially when you're talking about opposition politics or folks on the other side of the house or on the other side of an issue, is that and you got to meet with everybody. I think the one other thing that I think you sort of alluded to, especially by sprinkling the Senate in there, is you got to meet with everybody because the government today is not the government tomorrow, and you don't know when that's going to change. But you do need to connect with everyone. And if you just play sort of inside baseball with the folks that you know and like and agree with generally, even if you don't fly a partisan flag yourself, then other folks notice that too. And I ran into that, especially when I was leading the big city mayors. We were so often proximate, and the government was really smart. They met with us relentlessly. And then the image was we were always standing next to government. So even though we weren't partisan, I never had a federal political card of any kind. People assumed I was so far up the prime minister's rear end that I was read from top to bottom, and you can't get away from that unless you are also meeting frequently with other folks who you might personally disagree with, but need to be educated on the issues and the perspective, and it may be harder to build relationships there, and so the shortcut can be to agree or say something that feels like a way to build a bridge. But if that compromises the real reason that you're there, that's it's a Faustian bargain, right? But it's really, really hard. It's psychologically, humanly, really, really hard not to indulge in a bit of that. I think we've all done it. So
So, when you're looking at policy change, I'm just wondering your opinion about how important it is to bring policy solutions through the lens of a lawyer or legality of things that are happening in other areas. I was recently at a conference looking at law reform, and they were saying that that was a critical part of being effective. So, I'm interested in knowing more.
I can give a little bit of our experience. So I think that's useful and that's part of your analysis and your prep work. Um, Primarily, our policy work to date has been at the provincial level in BC. And what I know about this is that we create a policy statement. We have one drafted. But what we know is that when you get success and it actually makes it and the government's going to take it, they have their own policy writers and it's going to have to go through them anyway. So you have to expect that it's going to change. But in our experience, it is useful to come with your actual policy statement once you're at that, once you've passed a little bit of the relationship level and you're really talking business, to have one drafted. And we have had both ways where we've had it vetted by a lawyer when it was something that was really this was going to go, to just drafting internally and working with our local elected officials team to get it to a place where they felt they could take it forward. But you definitely have to know the legal landscape and you have to consider all of that as part of your analysis when you're doing that prep work I talked about. But absolutely, you have to know.
Hi, my question is on the yes, we all can do the advocacy or reaching out to MPs. I'll begin with one example. Anytime I go to any of the sites, I try to connect with the cleaners and the cooks and the securities. They will give you all the information about the sites that you don't normally hear from the big guys. So my question is, yes, we'll do everything. How effective if we can advocate to those civil servant, the career bureaucrat, it's a government change, people change, MP change, they stays there. Let's say when new MP comes, they get their first knowledge from those associates, right? So how effective and how important is that? And one last thing, because through this stage, why can we do every year once a day, like October, everyone on the street for the World Homelessness Day? Thank you.
So I think those folks are key. And it was an interesting when I heard don't be disappointed if you get a staffer. I actually get excited when I get a staffer at first because in my experience, it's those staffers that actually do all the work. The MP, like the MPs and MLAs are wonderful people, and I love meeting with them too. But it's their teams that really do the work. So I get excited if they're bringing a staff member with them, and I always personally make a point of really building a relationship with that person because that's who you're going to have to do most of your follow up with, regardless. So critical to make friends with the teams. In my experience, and organize that day. I'll be there.
I've just add one anecdote to that, which is that around staff, if you are polite to staff in scheduling those meetings, you'll be more likely to get the meetings and build relationships with those folks too. And even down to some of the most important folks at Edmonton City Hall were QP Local 30 workers who looked after safety and looked after cleanliness. And if you got to know those folks, they knew more about what was happening at City Hall than some of the staffers did. So yeah, absolutely. Everybody, including workers, are an important part of the relationship ecosystem and a great source of intelligence and advice, even from time to time.
Hi, I just want to, God, my stomach is in a knot right now because we're sitting here being told how to go and speak to your government. As a taxpayer and electing people to our office, if I elect you as officer, if I go elect you as my MP, and you come to my community and tell me you're going to come back and do this after you get elected, and we call you 6 or 7 times, you do not show up, and I'm supposed to call you with my attitude in check, with my tax dollars in check, and haven't been a government employee for 30 years, and also a taxpayer for 55 years, own a house, and my elected officials not coming to my community, not giving me housing, and out there and taking my land, and I'm going to go to my elected MP. First, I'll call my MP. We have a veterans coming up next week on Saturday, 5 years in a row. Would you please come and be at the veteran affairs, recommend the black vets? So I am not one of these people. Excuse me if I am upset when someone comes and tells me how to speak when I go into an office. I've been in politics, well, involved with politics for years, but I think any elected person get elected, they come to my community, tell me they come in there because they want to see changes being made. But we also have a lot of people going into politics because of power and control, and forget the hell about all of us that they put them in there. They take power and control and don't come back to my community. So they don't get elected. Right now, our country is in a mess. No matter which party you look at, it's a mess. And I'm going to read this little thing that someone said earlier. Homelessness is a choice of government. Yes, it is. Because the government put policies in place. And the fact that government give all the large corporations the money to build houses in this country, we have builders that want to build affordable homes that makes affordable sense. Government still gives the money. Yes, they are the problem with homelessness because government is not dealing with homelessness the way they should be. They're looking at dollars. They're looking at cents and using their friends to become the builder. So for me, this whole, oh my God, this whole thing of telling me how to go to my politician, when my politicians and haven't been a union member and walking my advocacy, also I've been an activism. To have someone tell me that we got to walk in with clean hands, pure heart, and walk on eggshells, that's not what our country needs to hear right now. You're like a politician, and I watched you when you were running for the politician in Ontario. I watched it all. That's one thing I do, but I'm saying that we as a country, you need to take back control. And our government goes in there for say one thing and do something else. So for me, coming here today and say, this is how you got to go and talk to your politician. If my politician respected me or any politician respect you, you don't have to be going. I call a politician, I'm taking a day off from work, and I get there and the staff person talking to me, I am going to be angry. Yes, I am going to be angry. It's not about disrespect. The disrespect came to me when the MP or the MLA didn't show up. So we have to also maintain our cool. So I'm saying I am getting tired. We're starting to sound like Americans. Excuse me, I'm a Canadian. We have rights. And I hear so much garbage going on. What would Trump do? I'm not a Trumper. I'm a Canadian. And I'm sick and tired of our country coming like Americans. We have to stand on our own, speak our rights, and I'm sorry, but I'm tired of it. Sorry.
Yeah.
I just want to validate that anger. It's we're living in a weird time. We're being told that the way to solve this housing crisis that we all care about is to give more money to the same people that have caused the crisis in the first place, to build more housing that is affordable to whom? to to rent units at higher rates to line the pockets of shareholders in on Bay Street and Wall Street. This is not. There's absolutely there's every justification to be completely pissed off about what's going on in these conversations about housing at QP. We've been advocating very clearly for public money to be spent in the public interest, not for private profit. And the national housing strategy, that's been our critique of it. We thank you. That's been our critique of it. We believe very strongly that we need to be talking about social housing. We need to be talking specific. All public money should be going towards social housing, nonprofit housing, and cooperative housing. In our view, not to the companies that are building unaffordable housing and calling it affordable. A $1,500 month rent in Moncton being passed off as affordable housing. Affordable to whom? It's a complete joke. So I just want to validate that anger, and you'll remember that on one of the slides about the diversity of tactics, the first bullet point was civil disobedience, and union members know the importance of walking away from our jobs and demanding what's right, disrupting everyday business to make life better for everybody in our community. So I'm 100% in agreement.
Trying to find a quote from, yeah, Dr. Marcia Anderson from Manitoba, who said, "From now on, instead of vulnerable people, I'm going to use the phrase people we oppress through policy choices and discourses of racial inferiority," which is infuriating that that's what happens in our country. But I think that that was a great way of naming the challenge that is anger worthy. And I hear your anger, and that is absolutely part of the change process too. And politicians have to be able, public community leaders of any kind need to be able to hear and tolerate and intake anger and strong emotion as part of any process of healing. And through Truth and Reconciliation, we've seen a large and unfinished version of that. And so on some of these issues, we're absolutely, moving through the stages of grief, and anger is one of them. Denial's one of them, right? So so at all points in the process, that has to be part of the discourse. I think the narrow part of this was, once that has got the attention of decision makers, what can be done by way of public policy changes. But yeah, I hear your frustration. I do. Other other questions? We got a little more time.
I was really happy to feel some passion in the room, actually, because I think that's what brings us all here. And we all have to feel that about something to make changes. And I'm glad that the point was brought up about, that we often as frontline workers just receive lip service or empty promises or maybe some fake attention. Um, to our efforts, and that we too have a busy schedule to be respected, and put in a lot of work to our days and long hours, and that we want to know if we're making the time for something that it's going to be worth it. um, but so, and in the interest of truth and reconciliation, back to what you said too, is acknowledging the issues and being direct and transparent. If you're not direct in your conversations and your challenges and your solutions, then you leave too much room for politics to skirt around or fluff things that could be ambiguous or taken different ways. Um, so my original question was more so directed to Chelsea, and it was around an avenue or advice that you might have for frontline workers looking to break into policy reform, because I too started thinking I hated policy and wanted nothing to do with any of it until I realized it was my biggest barrier in systemic change, and have taken a massive interest, and I'm a huge advocate locally for policy changes, and a resource as well in solution based conversations. But government and nonprofits are two different schools of thought. And you are a right brain or a left brain, typically, if on that. And it's how do you break through that barrier while keeping your school of thought, so being accepted and allowed into those positions to make the internal changes um, without compromising what got you there.
With a whole lot of self-reflection and effort, to be honest with you, because um, that can be really hard, staying true and on task and focused. And yes, I feel that so much. Um, what I would say is that it needs to become really an intentional part of your work that you prepare for. And in the same way, in my mind, because I come from the front line, it's helpful for me to parallel it to frontline experience. So maybe this will work for you, maybe it won't. We can chat more. Please reach out. But I liken it to when I would work the front line and I was going to go into a conversation with a young person I walked alongside that I thought might be tough for them or for me, right? Because we all bring something to the table. And I would have to prep for it and think about it. And I do the same when I'm going to meet with an elected official or one of their staffers. I have to do the prep work, not only to be able to understand who they are and what I'm going and what makes them click and how I'm going to connect with them as a human, but also to keep myself sane in this work because I think that's really important. And we heard um, a great keynote speaker earlier today around the burnout. And this is an area of work that's risky for me because it's very tiring and exhausting for me to match that brain stuff. So I think preparing yourself, giving yourself space, giving yourself grace, if this is not your go-to area and you're brave enough and excited enough to work in it, give yourself some grace and patience. And it's not always going to be perfect, and that's okay. The point of it is that it matters to you and it matters to the people that we walk alongside, and that you try and you show up and you try and you band together with people. We're not meant to do this work alone. So if this is something you're interested in, I'd love to lock arms with you in that work because we need to do it together. But I don't think I have a magic bullet answer other than I know it's hard. And yes, it is emotionally and like academically taxing to do that. So be prepared, take care of yourself, be graceful, and just keep showing up like we do with the people we walk alongside. Same idea. You said the politicians, they're people too. So I kind of try to frame it like that for myself, that this is just another stakeholder, the people I walk alongside and the people I'm trying to influence. And so I try to approach it kind of with the same techniques, to be honest.
Thank you both. I suppose this is going to be something of a similar question, and I appreciate both of your presentations today. Uh, Chelsea, in particular, your examples really struck me because one of the things that we tend to know about these organizations that are doing really successful work is they have the capacity to do it. They have entire departments that are built around government relations. And so for me, in a nonprofit, we have one full-time staff who does not only our government relations, but also our communications, also our community engagements work, all of that kind of stuff. So it's really hard for us to be able to do all of this uh, at the capacity that we're supposed to do for those groups, notwithstanding all the organizations that are on the other side of the table trying to financialize. And they definitely have the resources to be doing the work that both of you are talking about in a much more strong capacity than we are. So I guess for both of you, what advice do you have for, I guess, maximizing our FTEs in that we do have for doing government relations so that we get the best, I guess, bang for our buck, if nothing else?
Go ahead first. Uh, I'm gonna maybe what I'll I'll ask you to forgive me for maybe perhaps not answering your question directly, uh, but using it as an opportunity to say something I was hoping to say that I hope will be relevant nonetheless, which is that we kind of live in this weird kind of stakeholder government relations world where everybody's a stakeholder. Right? Even the companies that stand to make billions of dollars from these deals are stakeholders, and you are a stakeholder. Uh, and so you sit in these tables where you might be called in for a consultation, and if you get what you want, people might get homes, and the right to housing might be realized. If they get what they want, they'll be multi-billionaires now. But you're all just stakeholders. So it's an uphill battle, and you're right that these folks have armies of GR folks who are working hard, who have all kinds of connections, who work at firms like Navigator, who know all of the ins and outs of who's who and who's working for whom today and who's working for whom tomorrow and all of that stuff. And that's why we have to make sure we do everything we can uh, to be part of these conversations because man, I mean, so many of our organizations have so much to give and so much wisdom to share, but just don't have the time, don't have the staff, don't have the resources. But we've got to find a way to do it because those guys are doing it really effectively, and they're running to the bank happy. So if we really want to make sure that we realize progressively the right to adequate housing, we have to do this work.
So, yes, we have to. And it is so hard in the nonprofit environment. I work for an organization that's 95% privately funded. We can't just decide we want another GR person. That's not our reality. Um, and so we have to get creative and start picking away. And we cannot do it all, is number one. So find what fits best with your organization. Maybe it's that you sit at a table that does this work. So your organization doesn't necessarily have to take it all alone, but you have representation on a table. So an example for us was I sat on the BC Coalition to End Youth Homelessness, which was a collective of us across the province that were working on policy change. So my organization didn't have to take it all on. So there's little opportunities. So find those places that feel like a fit for your organization and also match your current capacity level. You don't have to do it all, but there's little ways you can get involved. Attend an event. Um, Sign your name on a letter. So sometimes Covenant House doesn't have the time to author something, but maybe another one of our colleagues that we've locked arms with is going to write an advocacy piece and we can have our name on it as a co-signatory. So I think there's a lot of ways you can be involved depending on your capacity level, and that changes over time, and that's okay. And also the other piece around we can't do this alone. So lock arms with organizations and people that have shared values and shared missions and shared dreams for what our communities can be, and do it together, because none of us can do it alone for many reasons, just because that's not who we're meant to be as people, but also because of the nature of the nonprofit world. We're not going to have the fancy people that can do this. I mean, maybe someday some of us will, but there is still such influential ways you can do this work. And I'm so happy to chat about that more, and things we've done along the way.
If I can, just a very quick,
Please.
you just reminded me about something, Chelsea. There's also all of our provincial associations, the nonprofit housing associations, the cooperative housing associations, who all really try to dedicate time to this stuff. So, and I know there are folks from these organizations here in the room. So, definitely, these folks are also happy to, I know, work with individual organizations to do capacity building and that kind of thing as well, and help you think through some of these questions about how to do government relations at your local organization. So reach out to your provincial associations.
And I'd go a step further, and CAH exists to do this as an alliance model, trying to get us all singing from the same song sheet and then facing government with the kind of community that's assembled at a conference like this. So I'm a big believer in and alliances and coalitions and associations. But I also think that, and I saw this in Edmonton, that we had probably 12 different agencies who did frontline work serving unhoused Edmontonians. And when they came with 12 different halftime GR people with 12 different messages, it was hard to make coherence. And then the power brokers can pick whichever message they like the most out of that fractured ecosystem. That is a disorganized space. An organized space would be as many of those 12, and we never got to the point where all of them were on the same page. There was always one, I'm not going to name it, that was off on its own, not a housing focused provider. Everybody else became a housing focused shelter, sharing the same message and aligned and sharing resources on how to do their advocacy to all orders of government. So my advice would be don't have each have a halftime GR person, figure out how to pool with as large a coalition as possible so that 6 or 8 agencies coming in together can equal the voice of that strong outlier that maybe a different order of government would prefer their model because it's not as expensive in the short term, even though they're blowing their brains out on hospitals and jails. Anyway, don't get me started. We got time for one more question.
Hi. We often find ourselves in Newfoundland uh, in conflict with some of the government systems that would be public serving. And I had to write these emails and I get a stupid ATIP response and it's really frustrating. Do you have any advice on how to, have a productive dialogue over email with government officials, not necessarily elected, that can kind of be progressive, that isn't just always shroud in the ATIP kind of language that we often see?
Uh, it- yeah, it's a struggle. It's trying to build that relationship is what's going to get you past those form responses. Uh, I think the only advice I can give you is to nevertheless persist. Uh, but I just want to acknowledge that you're not alone with that problem here. I think many folks here would have. I'm seeing folks nod, would have stories to share, and you can, I think, all commiserate. And perhaps folks can exchange ideas on how you've been able to get past that. But it is a challenge. I just want to acknowledge that.
And I would say that um, because everything is documented and we live in this society where everything gets FOIP'd as the Alberta legislation, but freedom of information, privacy requests, people are guarded in what they write. And I think among many public servants, there is a thirst for a real conversation about these issues, but not a lot of safety to do that in writing. So at a conference like this, or wherever you can find the opportunity to meet that person, look them in the eye and say, tell me what you really think. Sometimes they won't if they're scared for other reasons or feel limited for other reasons. But in a lot of cases, that's where you'll get the straight goods if you can find them or have a coffee with them or just kind of break out of the document tracker, evidentiary chain kind of um, uh, stranglehold that I think a lot of people and elected officials, I think, feel that way too, canned responses and so on and so forth. So get away from documentation, get away from a microphone, and you might get a real answer. Well, we ran out of time. We had more questions. I'm sorry we couldn't get to everyone, but appreciate the engagement, appreciate the energy, appreciate the heart. And systems change does require policy advocacy, 100%. But it also requires a fight and a cry for justice when we're surrounded by it. So we need the activists and we need the advocates and we need the allies and we need people in suits and ties implementing this stuff too. So it takes all of us together in alliance, which is why we're here. Thank you very much.